Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Target Smart Podcast. I'm your friendly facilitator, Anthony Sanfilippo, joined as always by your favorite Democratic operative, Albert Morales. Albert, how you doing, friend? Good to see you again.
I'm good, Anthony. I'm excited about today's show. It's not often I get to reconnect with former colleagues and people I consider family within the Democratic Party, and Sean Meloy, who joins us today from Pennsylvania. John is the vice president of for political programs at the LGBTQ plus Victory Fund. Most of us know it as the Victory Fund. They fund candidates, recruit candidates from the LGBTQ plus community across the country. They are now, I think, over 1,400 strong in terms of folks that they've gotten elected to office. Sean happens to be the very first LGBTQ plus member elected to the DNC from Pennsylvania. So
Wow.
I ran into him recently while we were in Chicago, and just really quickly, but it's always a delight to see Sean. And you always know the people who are really good at their job. They really love it. And he's been there now, I think, 6-7 years. So I'm really looking forward to catching up with Sean and talking all about Pennsylvania. Remember
Well, of course.
Tim Russert used to say Ohio. Well, today it's Pennsylvania.
Well, I'm excited to do this because that's my home state, right?
Yeah.
I'm on the opposite side of the state as Sean. I'm on the Philadelphia side, and we'll get to Sean in just a minute. But just to let everyone know, make sure that you subscribe to the show here, the Target Smart Podcast, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon. You can ask Alexa to play the Target Smart Podcast, and she will, or wherever you get your podcasts. Or you could subscribe to us on YouTube and hit that like button. It helps us a lot. That's great. And don't forget to connect with us on X at Target Smart, Facebook, Target Smart DC, and find us on our LinkedIn page as well. And if you want to reach out to us, any comments or questions, you can always email the program at the Target Smart Podcast at targetsmart.com. So without further ado, let's welcome to the program guy you gave a great introduction to, Sean Meloy. Hey, Sean, good to see you.
Hello. Happy to be here and see you both.
Awesome. The one thing before we really dive into the issues, right? Albert always likes to, when he brings a guest on the show, he likes to do something a little bit biographical to start. So I never know where he's going to start, where he's going to go with this, because he knows you guys better than I ever do. So I'm going to throw it over to Albert, and Albert, let you take away the first question, and then we'll dive into the issues thereafter.
Sure, Sean, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to join us today. I know everyone that plays politics at your level is very busy right now, and your schedule is mapped out from sun up to sundown. So it's not lost on us. You took the time to sit down with a couple of political hacks to discuss all things Pennsylvania and the great work that your organization is doing. But as Anthony said, I like to always start the program by allowing our guests to provide our audience with a little bio, how you got started in politics. What was that first political memory, and why did you decide to make this a career when you could probably be making mega millions up in Wall Street somewhere? Someone of your intellect.
Well, thank you, Albert. Always a pleasure to be with you. And yeah, I mean, this is a crazy year in politics, but it's also, politics is just crazy. But, I remember my parents, arguing, I would say, or disagreeing during the Clinton administration, right? During the Monica Lewinsky, Ken Starr, right, at the kitchen table. And then I went to middle school, and I had to do a report on the differences between Al Gore and George W. Bush. And that was the year, you may remember, they're like, oh, they're both the same. And I came, with my comparison chart, and I was like, they're very different, right? When it came, and I came down and said, I agree with Al Gore. And, the miscarriage of justice that happened after the 2000 election was really when I was like, I want to get involved. I want to do this, right? I started watching cable political stuff, right? Crossfire, all that kind of stuff. And end up starting a Young Democrats at my high school, and running for, senior patrol leader in my Boy Scout troop. And, kind of caught the bug, and have been in it ever since. And that took me to Capitol Hill. That took me to, working at the Democratic National Committee, a bunch of other gigs doing advocacy for consumers, right? The people. And then I even ran for office, in 2022. So I've done a lot of it, but very excited to use all of that to help out the amazing LGBTQ candidates we've got at LGBTQ Victory Fund.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Victory Fund before we dive into the issues? Because, for people maybe who don't know about the work that you guys do, it's just fascinating that you've gotten 1,300 LGBTQ plus people elected in the past 7 years. That's a lot in a short period of time. So I figure give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the Victory Fund.
Yeah. And so, not a lot of people know about us, even though we've been around for over 30 years. But we are the only organization in the country dedicated to getting out LGBTQ pro-choice candidates elected up and down the ballot. So from local city councils and school boards to, the U.S. Senate. And we were, the first big national endorsement for, Pete Buttigieg when he ran for president. But, you've got to meet our criteria. You've got to be running a viable campaign, right? So that means you can't be running in a really tough seat and not have the resources to, really get your message across the line with voters who are not inclined to agree with you. You've got to be an out LGBTQ person and fight for the full diversity of our community, right? You can't be racist. You can't be anti-trans. And then you've got to believe in that fundamental right of privacy, right? That was previously enshrined in Roe versus Wade, but is now very much under attack. And that has to do with bodily autonomy. That has to do with being pro-choice. That has the right to have your government not be in your bedroom. And so those are our criteria. And we started off with just like a dozen candidates in the 90s. And we've now grown that. I think in 2022, we got over 500 folks endorsed. And I think we're on track to probably do that again this year. We've tripled the amount of out elected people over the last 7 years. It was a little over 450, I think, back in 2017, and now we're over 1,300, and hopefully going to go even higher. We've got some amazing folks who've already won primaries and are poised to win in November, and then a lot of toss-up races that are actually going to impact the makeup of state legislative chambers, the U.S. Congress, the U.S. Senate, and who's in charge of all those entities.
So, Sean, you mentioned these numbers, and they're nothing short of spectacular. But how do at Target Smart, we help our clients identify voters of all stripes, all political stripes. How do you use, I guess I should rephrase the question differently. Back when you and I were at the DNC together, it wasn't that long ago. Social media was around, but it wasn't like this, didn't dominate. We recently learned that the Harris Walz campaign is going to be spending more dollars actually on digital versus what they call, I forget the term that is used, but regular television, as we all know it. How do you use data to, identify potential candidates, or is it organic? Do they just sort of come to you because they know your organization and you've established, you're Sean Meloy, so you're considered an authority? How does that work?
It's a mix. It's a mix of everything. There are folks who've known about us and heard about us because we got involved early, right? In San Diego, where we had some of our first big wins, and we've been able to keep a city council seat in LGBTQ hands as a legacy seat, right? In Hillcrest, the Hillcrest neighborhood, very LGBTQ friendly. But we've got the mayor of San Diego now, right? The president pro tem of the Senate and former Speaker of the House, Tony Atkins, who's running for governor of California, right? came through, in the early days. In Houston, our current CEO, Mayor Anise Parker, right, made history as the first LGBTQ person ever to lead a major city, a top 10 city. But there are still places, right, that have never seen an out LGBTQ candidate, and they don't necessarily know about Victory. So it's a mix of us getting the word out, and then also, having our elected officials, our candidates, and our network grow so that everyone knows that if you want to be in public service in the United States of America and you're an LGBTQ person, you've got to be in touch with Victory in some way. And so, we work to train folks. We've got C3, the Victory Institute, that trains folks how to run as an out LGBTQ candidate, because there are unique things that you will experience or want to be prepared for. But the brass tacks of it all is, we're looking for candidates that are running that want to fight for their community, right? And that's what our most successful candidates do. They're not running to make history. They happen to be making history as they fight for a better vision of their communities. And we're happy to help them along the way.
You mentioned a couple of issues at a very high level in your first answer, but if we can dive into them a little bit more now, what do you, as we approach the general election, what do you identify as the key issues for the LGBTQ plus community in this election cycle that people really should be focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that LGBTQ community members understand and have understood in almost every single election that folks have been, identifying LGBTQ voters, is that our very lives are on the ballot. And especially this year for our trans friends, the Republican Party has made it very clear that they do not want to treat trans people as people. They do not want them to have any sort of rights, whether that is to make their own medical decisions, whether that is to exist, right, be called by their name. They want to basically make them not part of our society. And Donald Trump just doubled down on this yesterday. And so, what's to say that lesbians, gay people, right, other people in the LGBT community are not going to be next? That's normally the way these things happen. And when you have the rhetoric, both anti-democratic, small d democratic rhetoric, and the hate that Donald Trump continues and to perpetuate, which has been a calling card of his for a decade now, LGBTQ people know that our rights are on the ballot, and that in a fully functioning democracy, we are not fully equal yet, but we at least have a chance to continue fighting for those rights, right? To not be discriminated against, to maintain marriage equality. But we don't have those rights. In a Donald Trump winning and Project 2025 drive towards dictatorship, Christo-fascism, whatever you want to call it, we are not part of that equation. And so our lives are very much on the ballot this year in a way that that is above and beyond even the past, because I know you two know, and probably most people listening here, the plans that they put out publicly are just the start, right? And that's where the trans attacks are. But we know that we're not far behind, and so we cannot be turning out in more numbers. And I think we're going to be turning out at some of the highest levels for Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and Democrats than we have in a long time.
Sean, it seems to me like when we were at the party, we were always on offense, right? We were trying to get that next big win, whether it was for our families in the undocumented community, getting them a legalization with eventually a path towards citizenship. But this year, it just feels different. It feels like we're all on defense, and it's about self-preservation. For Latinos, it's making sure that our grandparents aren't getting deported, aren't amongst the 15 million or so that Trump has already announced that he's going to, wipe off the map here in the United States. For women, 1 in 3 women have been relegated to second-class citizenship by having them stripped of their healthcare rights. And for the LGBTQ plus community, it's the threat of who's to say the Supreme Court won't do away with marriage equality? I mean, where does it end? Do you think I guess the question is, you see that as a battle cry for us, and it makes us want to work harder to win. I think it's motivating a lot of people, at least in my community, to really come out and, defeat Trump again. What's your view on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the amount of folks who are going to come out not only to stop Donald Trump, right, are the same amount of people who are going to come out and vote for Joe Biden to stop Donald Trump, 4 years ago. I think that this year we also now have the opportunity, and what we've heard is that folks are inspired, right? Kamala Harris is giving them hope, right? So that we can turn this page, we can help make sure that we have a future where we all are welcome, where diversity is embraced, right? The diversity that exists, right? It's not something that's going to happen. It is already part of our society, right? So acknowledging and welcoming and turning the page to help make sure that this chapter continues, in a positive direction. So I think that, it is defense in the sense of we are defending our right to be out, to be in public, to exist in this, great experiment of American democracy. And, I really do believe that the hope that Kamala Harris is now giving people is just going to amplify that, kind of reflexive defensive vote that folks are going to have.
Before we switch gears here, Don, to our next topic, because we all want to hear about Pennsylvania. What are some of the unsung victories that you've seen for your community? Or I can think of some for people of my background, but the ones that don't make the press, obviously, to hear that almost some 1,400 LGBTQ plus folks have been elected is pretty compelling. But what is it that you wish the media would focus on more?
Well, that's a big question. I want them to, actually drill down to the same level they are drilling down on Kamala Harris to Donald Trump and his supposed policy proposals. But I think that, one of the things that we always say is representation is power, right? So whether an LGBTQ candidate wins or loses, showing that we can actually step forward and be part of the structural makeup of our country that has traditionally isolated us, discriminated against us, not only gives folks hope, but also shows that they too can do the same thing. And so, we have a record amount of folks who are currently in office. We are still only 0.25% of elected officials in the United States. 7.2% of the population of the US currently identifies as LGBTQ, and Gen Z identifies about 25% as LGBTQ+. So we've got a long way to go to having, equitable representation in our government, but we've come a long way. But I think that Danica Roem winning in Virginia, it was huge. That was like the first big race I worked on here at Victory. And almost every single trans candidate that I talked to, right, has said, seeing that she could do that, right? And it wasn't just in a blue district, right? It was a lean red district at the time, right? That was trending purple, against a bigot, right? The self-proclaimed, biggest bigot of Virginia. And that was a huge moment. And that has inspired so many other trans candidates to step forward. And in this moment, we need more and more trans non-binary people, right? People who can help explain and show that, they're just people. They just want to help serve their communities. They just want to exist and live, right? Help people understand that they are not these, terrible things that Republicans have tried to make them into. And that kind of representation continues to be really important. We've got some amazing candidates running this year, but I think that moment and the importance of the Democratic Party to understand that they need to be including LGBTQ people and especially trans people in this moment as part of their recruitment strategies, as part of their messaging, as part of lifting up, because that helps educate people, that helps bring more people into the tent, and that helps pay significant dividends that will stop, at least some of this hatred that is being used against trans people, that really doesn't even work against independent voters, right? It's really just a base motivation strategy, but it's one that is not helpful to the discourse, is not helpful to the toxic environments that trans people and LGBTQ people already face day to day.
All right, it's time, Sean, to kind of dive into PA, right? I mean, because like our state,
one more thing, Anthony.
Oh, go ahead, Albert.
No, because I think one thing, Sean, that I left out was that I do think the country is changing and for the better. You mentioned the case in Virginia, but I think of my own family, like my dad, who, as I recall, growing up, was the biggest homophobe you could think of, right? And so one day he landed in the hospital with a stroke, and I'd already been living in DC, so I couldn't be back and forth a lot. But our cousin, Victor, who was gay, is gay. He was the one with the office job that afforded him the ability to stop at the hospital and check in on my dad every day and see to it that the doctors weren't missing anything. And boy, did he change his tune. They happen to be visiting us right now, and if anyone utters something about baby book, especially if you're at his house, he will show you the door. And he's become like really good friends with a gay couple of ours that visit us frequently, and he affectionately refers to them as his nephews. They like planning vacations to go places together. So that gives me hope. My dad comes from the Southern Baptist sort of convention type, and I think he's seen enough hypocrisy coming from that wing to tell him to show him that, maybe everything I've been hearing and reading about isn't so. That makes me happy in a big way, because I think of our daughter Martha, who is 14, and her generation, they don't give it any thought. They have friends who are from the community, and no one is discriminating. So her generation gives me hope, as well as Gen Z and young people in general. But I didn't want that thought to be lost on us, and I think that there's more good people than there are bad in this country. You just have to educate them a little bit more. Okay, Anthony, I know you're dying to talk Pennsylvania.
Well, yeah, and this is actually a pretty good transition now that you tell that story, Albert, because I think Pennsylvania, I mean, all eyes are going to be on our state for this election, right? And I would say, Sean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that when it comes to the issues that we're discussing here for LGBTQ community, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, probably the suburban areas just around them, that's where that's the bread and butter. That's where the votes are going to come for, supporting those issues. But the rest of the state is where I think we have a lot of people who are probably more like Albert was just talking about with his dad, who maybe are a little bit more closed-minded to these issues and to what's going on in this election. And so I guess my question for you is, how do we unlock the state of Pennsylvania? How do we change things in the rest of the state? I mean, you can't just sit there and go, well, yeah, they're the most populated areas are Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, so that's all you need, and that'll be enough. Like there needs to be more than that in this state, because it's such a battleground. What can be done to really unlock PA?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be a surprise to say that we need to organize everywhere and always, right? I think that, I think it was somewhere around the Iraq War, right? We just decided to not organize in rural areas of Pennsylvania, and we saw the implosion of that completely, right, when Barack Obama ended up running for president in 2008, right? You saw the stark contrast. The maps have not changed too much outside of that southeastern, suburbs of Philadelphia. Allegheny County is still blue, but everything around it is red. Philadelphia is still very blue, and those now purple counties are turning blue. But the rest of the state, the Commonwealth, is getting redder. But having the conversations, right? And I think that luckily a lot of these have been happening over the last 4 years. Organizing is happening in those areas. I was just at an event called Demstock. It was in Jefferson County, Pennsylvania, which Kamala Harris is not going to win, right? But what we've seen done successfully, both by Joe Biden in 2020, as well as candidates who've run statewide since 2020, is we have to get the margins up. We have to make sure that we are losing those counties by at least 5% less, right? 10% less. And I think, Tim Walz is barnstorming Pennsylvania in a lot of those same places. Albert, we were there in 2016, and I remember we at the DNC said, I don't know if we're doing the organizing we need, right, for Hillary. And I was based here in Pittsburgh, right? We were told not to get outside of Allegheny County, right? I tried to bring a surrogate to Cranberry, right, which is like a fast-growing suburb, and you would have thought it was the end of the world. But we need to make sure that those people feel like they are part of the conversation, and to, show up, right? That's 95% of everything is showing up. We may respectfully disagree, but I think that not showing up, not having those conversations have allowed a lot of the hatred and bitterness that Donald Trump exemplifies to calcify. And it's going to take a long time for us to break through, but we need to continue doing the work to do it. And so we need to organize everywhere always, and we need to make sure that the party is embracing that structure as well. And making sure that the resources are happening, because knock on wood, we're going to win Pennsylvania, all right, here in 60 days. But we need to make sure we continue to win Pennsylvania and continue the growth. And that involves having those conversations everywhere.
So, Sean, if you had a magic wand and you wanted to point the national media to somewhere or something, one issue that is not being talked about in Pennsylvania, what is it? We all hear fracking as if fracking is happening in every freaking precinct in the Keystone State. It's not. I think it's all interconnected, right? But what's that one a piece that you wish got a little bit more attention?
Oof. I think it all has to do with youth turnout, right? And closely correlated is that LGBTQ turnout. I think every time that Donald Trump says, "Oh, Kamala Harris wants to end fracking," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, young people are like, okay, I'm going to go register. I want to get out and vote, right? They've kind of seen that. They're kind of doing some of that turnout for us. And so I think that, we've got a ton of universities in Pennsylvania, and that registration effort is just starting, right? So how many of those folks get registered? How many of them actually end up voting in a state where that's won or lost by, 40,000 votes, 20,000 votes, plus or minus, right? That's good turnout at Penn State, at Penn, at Pitt, right, and a bunch of small liberal arts universities between them all. That's going to be a huge factor. I also think that the social media angle of organizing for both the Harris campaign, but for Democrats, is just not understood by the mainstream media still. I don't know if anyone really understands it, but I think that at the end of the day, right, we're going to need to knock and drag, because we're a party that needs to be motivated and needs to be reminded, right? Because our people are working people. Our people have families that they're trying to take care of. They're trying to just get by, right? If you look at the level of enthusiasm that we have right now, and the growth that is possible from knocking those doors in Philadelphia to say, hey, do you have your ballot request in? Are you coming out to vote today? The registration on those campuses, and the persuasion that is still underway, I think we're in a really strong position. But I think that youth turnout in Pennsylvania is not something that people think of, because we are an older state. But I think it's going to be the margins this time, and it's really going to have an amplified impact down ballot as well.
You talk about down ballot, and you talk about those margins, right? And we know it's going to be a close race in Pennsylvania. Are there different ballot measures from around this state that maybe could, or anything else that's down ballot that could maybe impact enough voters to kind of swing it just enough one way versus the other?
Yeah, I mean, for folks who don't know, our state house is controlled by Democrats by 1 seat. And that was, I think, less than 200 votes. One of the seats was decided by. So, truly, one precinct coming out stronger, one college precinct coming out, with more than anyone expected, could help make sure that we have a pro-choice, pro-LGBTQ, pro-gun safety state house that's fighting for public education, or a Republican state house that's going to do what they did in Florida, right, and in Tennessee and Utah, and some of these crazy regressive policies when it comes to any one of those issues. And I'm personally very excited about Malcolm Kenyatta, who is known to some folks. He ran for the U.S. Senate in the primary 2 years ago. He's running for Auditor General. He's an amazing state representative out of Philadelphia. He's young, he's gay, he's Black, he's progressive. And he's going to all those counties we already mentioned that a lot of folks don't go to when they're running for statewide office, both Republican and Democrat. And so I think he's going to help get a bunch of folks excited as well, because he is not the typical candidate we have in Pennsylvania, but he's who we need elected. And so I think he's going to have some up ballot impact. Those state legislative races, right? There's been an infusion of money, into those efforts earlier than ever before. So I think, those folks are going to really help make sure that the top of the ticket, right? Bob Casey, Kamala Harris, get over the finish line. But then also, move the ground, maybe take control of the state Senate, keep control of the state house, ideally grow our margins there so that we can actually really become a blue state in governing, right? Like so many of our other Northeastern, Mid-Atlantic, and even Midwestern brethren, that have been able to get fair maps, flip those chambers, move progressive policy, and then be rewarded by people saying, oh, government can work if we actually allow Democrats to take the reins.
We all hear about the permanent campaign. Sean, I think you just hit it on the head there. Pennsylvania is kind of like Texas in a way. Not as crazy. I'm not implying that Pennsylvania is crazy, but the Republican legislature is. Do you think that we hold a 1-seat majority because these seats are just gerrymandered, and that's pretty much sums it up, or is it a product of the election? This doesn't strike me as a state that ought to be 50-50. More like, if you look at it, it would be like closer to 60-40.
Yeah, I mean, so this has been a decades-long organizing effort, right? And part of this, permanent campaign is we've got elections every year, and they're all significant. But one of the most significant was in 2015 when we were at the DNC Albert, and we picked up seats on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And that helped build the base for us to take a majority. And so that allowed the bad maps to be thrown out for Congress back in 2018. We picked up 4 seats in Pennsylvania in 2018 in the U.S. House. And then to help make sure that fair maps were implemented for the state legislature, or fairer maps were implemented for the state legislature for this decade. And with those fairer maps, we were able to get a 1-seat majority. I think there's a lot more opportunity this year in a presidential year to pick up more seats because there was such a fast turnaround in 2022 from when the maps were decided to when people had to file to actually run. And so I think that, there's definitely more seats to be gained. And the state Senate has been a really tough turf for us that has been very gerrymandered. We have an absolute path this year to at least tying it, if not taking control of it, but at least eating into it so that 2 years from now, we can ideally hold the line and pick up some more seats, because in my entire lifetime, I am 37 years old, the Democratic Party has never had control of the state Senate. And so we've got a long way to go, but it would be really nice to have control of both chambers with an amazing governor, Josh Shapiro, to actually move some policy to bring us in line with these surrounding states, legalize marijuana, raise the minimum wage, have protections for public schools and for workers, right? Have LGBTQ non-discrimination protections, have, people overwhelmingly supported Josh Shapiro running on reproductive freedom, right? Enshrining that in, statute here. So many things that we want to do that continue to be stymied by a state Senate that is in Republican hands.
Really glad you brought up, sorry, Anthony, but Malcolm Kenyatta. You talk about politicians or candidates that have the it factor, whatever that it is. And I remember working alongside his pollster last cycle, and they were so impressed by his political acumen and his ability to just motivate people in general. He's got this spirit about him that he's a beast. And I just think had he had a little bit more money, I'm not convinced that he would not have won that. Nothing against Senator Fetterman, but boy, I think the future is really bright for Malcolm. He's like 10 years old. He's very young, but I'm glad you brought him up and lifted him up because that guy is going to be something really big someday. And Anthony, sorry, I cut you off, but I did want to get.
No, I'm used to it, Albert. At this point, I'm used to you jumping the gun on me, but that's all right. No, I just wanted to bring up the Senate race because I find this one pretty fascinating, Sean. And look, Bob Casey, I mean, it's a name that Pennsylvanians know forever from Bob's father when he was governor. He's very well liked in the Philadelphia area. Maybe it had something to do with him petitioning the baseball team to have dollar hot dog night, bring it back last year. But he got a lot of support for that. But the difference, I think, is his opponent this year is a little bit different than the last time we had the state Senate race when it was Fetterman versus Dr. Oz. I think McCormick's probably got a little bit more gravitas in a sense of that he can reach a wider audience than Dr. Oz. We all knew Dr. Oz, even though he got a lot of votes, we all knew he was kind of a fraudulent candidate. I think McCormick probably has a little bit more of a bigger base, let's put it that way, to work with. Do you view him as somebody who just falls right in line with Donald Trump, or do you think that he does have an ability to grab some of those moderate voters?
I think in a race that is as close as this is, possibly going to be, he might have a chance. But I do think that he's aligned himself very closely with Donald Trump, right? I think there's a lot more similarities to Dr. Oz than not, actually, right? They're both carpetbaggers, right? They're both folks who moved to Pennsylvania to run for office. They're both multi-millionaires, right? Who made their money off the backs of working people. And they both embraced Donald Trump, his abortion ban, right? So many of his, so much of his toxic rhetoric, right? And 2025 kind of strategies, hand the keys over to the corporations, right? And he exemplifies that as he's from from the biggest hedge fund companies in the world, right? I think he, helped make money in China. He made a lot of his money in China, right? Doing fentanyl deals, right? So, I mean, this is a guy who, is, I think, more similar to Dr. Oz than people want to give credit for. And, has aligned very closely with Donald Trump. That might have been a really strong calculation 6 months ago. But I think now, when we have someone who has been such a stalwart for working people, right? Bob Casey, right, is from Scranton, right? He's Pennsylvania's Joe Biden, even though Joe Biden is also of Pennsylvania in a way. But he's fighting for those working class people. He always has. And I think really putting a fine point on greedflation, right? He's introduced this legislation, right, to say, hey, we need to do something about this, right? Republicans love to complain about inflation, and obviously we all feel it. But it's like, actually, the price of making goods did not go up 30%, right? And you giving me one less Reese's cup, right? And charging me more to do it, right, is wrong, right? And he's called that out. And Dave McCormick's exactly the kind of person who told Reese's they should do that to make more money for their stockholders like him. And so there couldn't be a bigger contrast, I think. But so many folks are paying attention to the presidential race, right? I think more folks are going to start paying attention to the Senate race, as well as our attorney general race, that auditor general race, our treasurer's race. And then we have the several swing seats here for Congress. There's a potential Democratic pickup opportunity against everyone's favorite Freedom Caucus leader, Scott Perry, right? One of the original insurrectionist supporters, right? Someone who's also very closely aligned with Donald Trump and all the hate he stands for. So, there's a ton of other races that I think are going to hinge on overall turnout. But Bob Casey's in a really strong position to win because Dave McCormick, right? He's going to try to paint himself as so many things. And he tried to do that in the primary against Dr. Oz. He had to do that in the primary this time. But he's solidly aligned himself with Donald Trump. And so I think a lot of people are going to go out, vote for Kamala Harris, and vote for Bob Casey.
Albert's trying to talk to you right now, but his mic is muted. So let's try that again, Albert.
Yeah, I know you were getting back at me there, Anthony. It's okay. It's okay. I'm your retribution. Hey, Sean, we talked. You spoke to women and their significance in this election cycle, not only in Pennsylvania but across the country. Are you seeing that same level of, and I don't know if you want to call it enthusiasm as much as anger, that is motivating them to turn out in higher numbers this cycle? It's been my experience that when I've had my misunderstandings with the women of my life, they just shut down and they find a way to hit. But they will always come out on top. And do you think that's any different in Pennsylvania as it relates to this election cycle? I have to believe in my gut that, I mean, for a guy, it's hard to put yourself in their shoes, right? Because we've never been told by doctors, well, I can't see you until I kind of think that you might be dying. And then you can come back from the parking lot. I just can't wrap my head around that. And I think if I were a woman, I'd be, very angry. So do you think that that's going to be the motivating factor for women? We're seeing it amongst 18 and 49-year-olds. It's now taken over the economy as their number one issue across the board.
Yeah, I will use the feelings I felt, right? They're anecdotal, but at the convention, right, the moment that Kamala Harris came out, I've never felt energy like that. But the only other moments that match that are the two other women that should have been president, and that was Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren, right? The amount of energy that I felt in those moments, it was actually just replicated this weekend. I was in New York City and I saw the musical Suffs, right, which is about suffragettes. And at curtain call, I felt that same energy, and
Really?
women were feeling it. And there is this not certainty, but this drive to say, we are going to do this. Like, we are going to do it this time. And that is true. We also saw this, right? This was proven in Josh Shapiro's election, right? He ran on reproductive freedom, giving women the right to do what they want with their own bodies. And he won in a landslide election, right? And he was running against a candidate who has the exact same policies as Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump lies about what his policies are, but we know where his heart is and the people around him and what they're going to be pushing for. And that's a national abortion ban. Women are not going to stand for it. And every woman I know, right, is like, oh, I need to make sure I'm registered to vote and everything. And I'm helping them do that. But there is a drive out there that, correlates highly with, I think, younger people also, feeling that their distinct rights, right, their LGBTQ friends' rights, right, are very much on the ballot. And that it's time to turn this page, right, and make history, right? Turn the page on the Trump era, all this politics of the past, and let's move forward. And Kamala Harris is a perfect candidate to do that. So knock on wood, I think we're going to do it.
I agree.
Sean, we're going to have to talk offline about Suffs because I'm a big Broadway guy. Just kind of curious. I haven't seen it yet. Just kind of curious your take on it. So we'll chat about that once we stop hitting record.
That's a short version. Yeah.
That's a short version of it, right? We want to, mostly we were going to thank you for being part of the show. But before we let you go, can you tell our listeners, how they could help in Pennsylvania if they're able to, get out there and knock on the doors and get Pennsylvania voters activated and out to the polls or to get their ballots in?
Absolutely. If you know anyone in Pennsylvania, right, one of those students that just moved here, right, the filing deadline's coming up. So get the registration in, as well as request vote by mail, right? I know Donald Trump continues to try to demonize it. There's still some court cases pending about the dates, but just make sure you fill out the proper date and you'll be good. And then also, we're a big state. We touch a lot of other states. We're easy to get to from a lot of places around the East Coast and the Midwest. Come on down. We need the volunteers. There's more than enough folks to talk to, not only about Kamala Harris, but about Bob Casey, Malcolm Kenyatta, and our state legislative candidates. We need help all the way down the line. And then if you're interested in Victory Fund, victoryfund.org. I'm on social media at Sean Meloy. And if you're interested in running for office and you're an LGBTQ person, please get in touch. We'd love to help make sure that you get the resources you need in order to win.
All right, Sean. Well, I am going to make a promise to come door knock with you the last weekend for the election, because I'm in Maryland and I'm just like 45 minutes across the border. I think Littlestown is the closest city. We go there a lot for horse shows of all things, but I would love to make a difference, even if it's getting 5 more people to vote for the Harris Walz ticket. You've been a great guest, John. Again, thank you for joining us. Hope we get to do this again. Probably not before the election, but who knows? It's all going to be all eyes on Pennsylvania. So, Anthony?
Yeah, I guess you want me to.
Words?
No, I don't have any parting words. I usually do the, remind everybody that, if they want to subscribe to the Target Smart podcast, to do so on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon, YouTube, even YouTube Music now. They took over for Google Play. So you can subscribe and listen to us there, or you can watch like us on YouTube. Hit that like button. We thank you for that. Connect with us online on social media, on X at Target Smart, Facebook, Target Smart DC, and find us on LinkedIn. And if you want to email the show, tell us what you think of the episode, or if you have any suggestions for future guests, email us at the Target Smart Podcast at targetsmart.com. Other than that, I want to just thank Sean for his insights and his time today. It's been a wonderful episode.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Well, until next time, I'm Anthony Sanfilippo for Albert Morales, saying thanks for listening in, and we'll see you again next week.